Hello good people of the internet. My first video on the Zeiss ZX1 drew quite a bit of attention, that is if you compare it to some of my other videos, and the attention it brought was both negative and positive. But I'm not complaining because at the end of the day a handful of viewers decided to subscribe. Now that the camera is in the hands of reviewers, the big question is, have I changed my mind on what I said? You'll have to stick around to find out. The short version of what I am about to say is that yes, I still stand behind everything I said in that video. In fact, now that first reports on the Zeiss ZX1 are available, I realized that I actually left a few very important bits out. The reviews I've read have also confirmed what I speculated in my previous video. One of the questions I pondered on was whether this camera would have access to the Google Play Store. I guess I can claim that I was right with my suspicion. DP Review has confirmed that you can't download and install any additional apps. You can share photos to Instagram, Flickr and Facebook, but you won't be able to access the apps. I take it from that replying to comments and inquiries isn't part of the workflow Zeiss envisions. I guess the Google Play services could potentially be added through a firmware update, but I don't think that has ever been done before, and I have no idea how the certification is done. While there are ways of enabling the Play Store on Huawei phones, none of them is official. What also worries me is that Google has published a massive list of all the 30,390 devices that support the Play services, and the Zeiss isn't on that list. And by the way, that list covers all Android devices and not just smartphones, so you will see the Samsung Galaxy NX on it. I'm guessing that certification doesn't happen in an instant, so if Zeiss were to allow the Play Store on the ZX1, you will be waiting for quite some time. Now you might be asking yourself why that is such a bad thing. After all, Lightroom is pre-installed and you don't necessarily need anything else. There are a few reasons. Two, to be more precise, why not having the Play Store would worry me as a potential customer. You obviously won't be able to install any additional apps. Do you want to share a photo to Twitter? Unless Zeiss enables it somehow, there is no way of doing that. You would have to upload the photo to Dropbox, then share it using your smartphone, which kind of defeats the purpose of having a camera running Android. You also won't be able to upload your photos directly to Google Photos as you can't install the app. While Lightroom on smartphones is pretty good, you might also be interested in using other editors such as Snapseed or Visco. Once again, you're out of luck because you can't easily install anything other than what Zeiss gives you. The second reason concerns Lightroom. Without the Play Store, there will be no instant updates to Lightroom for you to install. It will be up to Zeiss to build a new firmware with the latest version of Lightroom installed. Does Zeiss have the capacity to do that? I'd wait and see. And handling app updates through firmware updates is a terrible way of doing things. You will have much more data to download and it will take longer than just installing an update from the App Store. While I'm on the DP Review article, browsing through the images, you can also see how badly Android is optimized for the Zeiss ZX1. Parts of the UI are forced into portrait mode even if you're holding the camera horizontally. That makes absolutely no sense. It really shows that Zeiss is primarily a hardware and not a software company. This is the first time they've done anything like this, and boy does it show. I would personally never consider buying an Android phone which can't get basic things such as the screen orientation right, but Zeiss is expecting buyers who paid $6,000 to accept an unfinished state of its camera software. Once again, you might be thinking it's not a big deal, but to me it just looks sloppy. It would be an easy task to fix this problem, but they didn't bother to do it. How many more bugs have made their way into the software? Another area I expressed my concerns was the choice of SoC. Once again, I feel vindicated in my speculation that the SoC in the Zeiss ZX1 might be outdated by the time it launches and not best suited for modern Android. We'll get onto Android in a bit. don't worry. While we don't know what exact SoC is inside of the ZX1, DP Review did provide some data on the camera's performance. According to them, exporting the same edited DNGs takes 30 to 50% longer on the ZX1 than it does on a Google Pixel 3a smartphone. The Pixel 3a is a mid-range phone released last year with an SoC from 2018 and 4 gigs of RAM. Yet it is up to 50% faster than the Zeiss ZX1. That's just bad. There's no other way of putting it. As the Zeiss ZX1 was announced in 2018, I now firmly believe that it is very likely that they didn't change any of the internals since the first inception. Based on how sluggish it is, it's possible that it's running an SoC from 2017 or even 2016. It's not just performance that suffers, but also efficiency. Modern SoCs can achieve the same performance using less power and thus producing less heat. If you take a look at the only review on B&H, which is from a verified buyer, they report that the camera gets almost too hot to handle on its left side after only 20 minutes in photo mode. That to me sounds like another indication that it might be using an old and inefficient SoC. The heat could of course also be coming from the sensor and have nothing to do with the SoC. But even then, if the SoC does get too hot, it will have to throttle, which will further hurt its performance. Speaking of power, I've not been able to find any real-world reports on how long the battery lasts, but interestingly, the Zeiss ZX1 does ship with two 3190 mAh batteries in the box. Does that mean that Zeiss is expecting buyers to need two batteries from the get-go? In an Android smartphone, a 3090 mAh battery would be considered a medium to small battery. One that would make it from morning to evening, but no longer. iPhones are generally more efficient, so I'm not taking them into consideration here. For comparison, the Galaxy S20s have a 4000 to 5000 mAh battery, and the Pixel 5 has a 4080 mAh battery. There is one big caveat though. Smartphones have cellular connections and the Zeiss ZX1 does not. And that cellular connection is power hungry. The same goes for the Google Play services, which could lead to the ZX1 being quite a bit more efficient. But then again, the battery in the ZX1 also has to power a massive camera sensor. So I couldn't say if the ZX1 would last longer or shorter when compared to an Android phone with the same battery capacity. And that brings us nicely to the subject of Android. Just like any smartphone, the Zeiss ZX1 takes about 20 seconds to boot. Just like any smartphone, the camera has to be in standby mode at all times if you want it to start up instantly. Guess what? Standby mode does consume battery. That means you're forced to choose between good battery life and a short start time. My X-T4 does both, and I wouldn't have it any other way. While we're talking about Android, I did notice one interesting thing in the quick look video B&H posted. Camera people probably didn't notice it, but as I'm a nerd who has been using Android for some time, I did. The app switcher you're seeing is straight out of Android Oreo or one of the previous versions. Guess when Android Oreo was released? That's right, in the fall of 2017. It's probably the version you would have gone with if you were starting the development of an Android device in 2018. Yes, it is still supported and the third most popular version, but for a $6,000 device launched towards the tail end of 2020, you should be expecting something more recent. After I had published my video and was replying to comments, I started to ponder what it would be like to actually use the Zeiss ZX1 for editing. I then realized that it doesn't even have an articulating screen. Don't forget that this is an 800-gram camera, and it's not necessarily small either. The Samsung Galaxy Note 20, which can definitely be considered a big and heavy smartphone, weighs a quarter of the Zeiss ZX1. Without an articulating screen, there's no way of plonking the Zeiss ZX1 down on a table and being able to see what you're doing, unless you were to have extremely high tables. But because it's 800 grams, you will not want to hold it in your hand for extended periods of time. Don't forget that when you're editing, you will only be holding onto it with one hand and using the other to control the touchscreen. So what options do you have? I guess you could rest it on your belly and strain your neck downwards, which I've heard is great if you hate yourself. Then there are a few other details I completely missed in my first video. For example, this camera, a street photography camera, isn't weather sealed. Oh, and it also has no subject tracking nor face detection. DP Review goes as far as to claim that they won't even try to photograph children or pets with the ZX1. They also reported that they ended up with more out of focus shots of static subjects than they're used to on modern cameras, which is a polite way of saying that the autofocus is bad. I've seen the argument that the Zeiss ZX1 will be good for the camera industry as a whole brought up again and again. The argument is that Zeiss is trying something new, which technically isn't true, and that would lead to more innovation. And I get it. A camera running Android is potentially an interesting competitor to our dumb cameras. Yet I still think that this camera will be looked back on as a failure. Partially because it runs Android, and it will not be the first camera running Android to have failed. Would that tempt anyone else to try the same thing? I have my doubts, and I wouldn't blame them either. It can't be denied that Android just isn't made for cameras. I detailed the reasoning in my previous video, but it boils down to that we use our cameras very differently to our phones. Samsung, who had decent mirrorless cameras and great knowledge of Android, couldn't make it work. What makes you think that Zeiss can? Samsung was also possibly the first trying to build a more advanced operating system for cameras, and it wasn't based on Android but on their own OS called Tizen. And yes, I know that Samsung also had a camera running Android, but they gave up on that concept rather quickly. My Samsung NX1 had a decent boot time, and had Samsung not given up on their photography business, I'm sure interesting additions could have been built for the camera software. What I'm trying to say is that there is definitely a place for more advanced operating systems on cameras, but that operating system will most likely not be Android. Perhaps we will see someone trying something similar to what Sony did with the Android subsystem in the near future. I can definitely see the appeal of optional apps running on cameras, especially if the system is opened up to developers. Before you comment, please remember that the Zeiss ZX1 isn't just a camera. It's a $6,000 camera that runs Android. This camera won't just need software updates to improve certain things such as autofocus. It will also need updates to Android for security's and stability's sake. Just because it's Android running on a camera doesn't mean we shouldn't have the same expectations as we do with Android smartphones. Not being a software company doesn't excuse Zeiss from supporting the ZX1 for many years. And by the way, Zeiss has not said how long the ZX1 will be supported. As always, thank you very much for watching. Please do hit that like button if you enjoyed this video, and consider subscribing to my channel. Right, it has just about been enough from me for one day. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.